Good afternoon. We're so excited to be kicking off our May webinar series for Find Your Why. This upcoming month's Find Your Why it's the right thing to do. And so for us, we're thinking about a lot of different components under that umbrella, specifically students identifying college as a path to a better life. So really thinking about careers that provide a springboard perhaps into another income bracket, for example. Students talk a lot about what their salary could be if they earn a post-secondary credential. We hear from a lot of students who take some really interesting guesses, as you can imagine, about what a starting salary could be once you earn a post-secondary credential. Oftentimes, it's not rooted in research, but what we do know is that students who participate with Tennessee Promise and tnAchieves do have an increased success rate. So providing a smoother transition into post-secondary and then additional support from that freshman first semester through a post-secondary credential is critical for many of our students who may be the first in their family to go to college, who may come from a lower socioeconomic background, who come from more vulnerable zip codes. All sorts of different students fall into this range of needing more. We have a mantra at tnAchieves that supports matter, but most importantly to us, it's which supports and how targeted can we be in those supports. A big important piece of this is always paying attention to our data. We are constantly evaluating not only the umbrella of tnAchieves, so how effective are we at moving the state's college going rate or helping move the state's college going rate? How effective are we at increased college retention and completion? We look at 3-year graduation rate, 6-year graduation rate. We cut all our data by subgroup, but we also have a really great partner in the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research who's been studying our work now for, gosh, maybe 12, 13 years, a really long time, Bill.
It has been a long time.
It's been a fantastic
Our privilege.
I love it because it's an external evaluation of the work we're doing, which is so important for us. But it also gives us an added layer of what we're doing well and, quite frankly, what we're not doing so well. And Bill and I, over the years, have had some really candid conversations about where tnAchieves is making, for lack of a better phrase, a dent in the universe and where we're not and how we can improve. And so I'm thrilled today to be joined by my friend, Dr. Bill Fox. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chrissy D'Alejandro, Executive Director of tnAchieves. I always hop into these things, Bill, and never introduce myself, but I'm thrilled to have Bill with us today, who is an expert in so many different areas, but he's become our go-to. He, along with Celeste Carruthers, who have been studying Knoxachieves and Knox Promise and tnAchieves, like I said, for many years. Bill, in my notebook, your title takes up 5 lines. So I'm going to tell you.
It's okay. You don't need to give it all. You know, they don't give us salaries, they give us titles.
Bill, I wrote it down, so I'm telling everyone. Bill is the Randy and Jenny Boyd Distinguished Professor, as well as the Director of the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research. He is, like I said, a good friend to me. The thing that I can tell you about Dr. Bill Fox is that he has more accolades and more brains than most of us will ever accumulate in our lives. But my favorite thing about Bill is that he always eats dessert at lunch and that he's willing to share dessert. So that is my fun fact about Bill Fox. But I'm thrilled he's here. And Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you to walk us through some data.
Thank you, Chrissy. It's always a great privilege to associated with tnAchieves and all the great work you all are doing. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here today. And I look forward to this exchange. A fun fact about Chrissy is she doesn't eat very much dessert. And so that leaves plenty for me if we're together.
But
so,
plenty of French fries, Bill.
Plenty of French fries, yeah, for sure. So, you know, you can see my title there. I actually had, you know, this originally, how interventions affect students' lives. And I don't know why I changed that at the last minute, because that's exactly what we're talking about here. And I thought what I'd do is give you sort of 5 stylized facts or data points about why we care about students making achievement at the post-high school level. And then secondly, talk about research we have done on Knox Promise. And Knox Promise was a predecessor to Tennessee Promise. And the reason why that matters is we're watching actual students. So time has to elapse to see what happens here. And so Knox Promise gives us a lot of years to investigate students. And then I'll talk about some stuff we're just starting on Knox Promise. So 5 things. First of all, why does it matter? It's clear in the data. It's clear in Tennessee. It's clear in the nation. Your unemployment rate, that is the probability you don't have a job, goes down with education. More education, more likely you have a job. And you can see it, you know, getting an associate's degree, you've improved your likelihood of being unemployed by at least 50% compared to people who don't quite finish high school, and it continues to rise from there. And your earnings go up with education. So simple. Why does it matter? Because it impacts the probability I have a job and what I earn on that job. Second reason it matters a lot, and this is a broader reason. It's not about the student, it's about all of us. The population growth of our country is slowing down and has been slowing really for 70 or 80 years, but it really slowed down in the last decade, and all the signals based on birth rates we have seen over the last decade is it's slowing much more than that as we go into the 2020s. And so why does it matter? Because we need the workers in the US and in the Tennessee economy. We simply can't afford to have anybody fall between the cracks. And then a third feature, which is related to that, but this is about the distribution of people by age now. So what's happening is that blue line, I think me here, as you look at that blue line, you can see aging of the population. You know, we simply grow. The over 65 population is growing like crazy and will for the foreseeable future. The young population shrinking a bit. That's back to the point I was just making. We need the workers. But a key thing then is we're shrinking on that green line at the top. This is the working population. And as a share of a slowly growing population, the working age share drops for the foreseeable future. We need everybody, and we need everybody with skills. The fourth point is about technology. And this chart is just showing you how long it takes to adopt and adapt to various technologies. And the key point, lots and lots of new technologies, and they get adapted and adopted very, very quickly. And so we need workers who are able to work with this technology. So these are just a few examples, and not only able, but willing to work with it. And again, that's going to rise with education. And then finally, this is a chart to just show you by industry how jobs have been created. This starts from right before the Great Recession and continues to today. So almost 15 years. And even after COVID, what it says to us is job creation is in industries that require more skills. Professional services, think science is a big part of some aspects of that, but accounting and legal services and the range. Education and healthcare, financial activities, all growing faster than average. And then you look down at the bottom, and I think the bottom is as informative as the top. If this is under 100%, what that means is there are fewer jobs in that industry today than there were 15 years ago. And if you look at that set of industries, what you see is it's a set of industries that generally are ones where, well, if I just work hard, I can make a good living. But if all of them, manufacturing and construction, have fewer workers today than 15 years ago. That doesn't mean zero workers. It does mean fewer. So as we think about these, it says, look, if I'm going to have a good income, if I'm going to have a high likelihood of a job, if I want to be a part of the labor force, and we need you all, then education is key to every aspect of it. So with those thoughts in mind, let's take a look at some research we did first on Knox Achieves, and Celeste Carruthers has led this work, and Celeste is is an outstanding researcher. For those of you who know her, you know what I'm talking about. So Knox Achieves was one of the very early community-based programs that offered free tuition. Kalamazoo Promise started a couple of years earlier. Along comes Knox Achieves, which then was quickly broadened out. It was started in Knox County, it was broadened out to 25 counties. Then Tennessee Promise evolved from it, and it was Tennessee Promise was the first state plan that really has passed in 50 years, and is widely recognized as a leader. And now there's 140 or so such programs around, and so lots of people following what we are doing and what you are doing, and what a difference that it makes. And so what we do is we take data on every student who participated in the 2009-2011 graduating classes from Knox County. And we examine, well, what happens to these students? What happens to their earnings, and what happens to their their job possibilities, and what happens in terms of their education? And so a couple of points about Knox Achieves that are very similar to Tennessee Promise. The first of all is its last dollar, and I won't go into the details of what that means, except that it means relatively little cost. And what it also means then is so much of the benefit of Tennessee Promise is not money. It's about the things that mentors and counselors and advisors and Tennessee Achieves does, because it's all these non-tuition benefits which are heavily key in what's going on. Many of the students were Pell eligible, which means that the cost really goes down of Knox Achieves, and then it's a much lower cost than some of the other programs. So with those thoughts in mind, let me just, okay, so we have this really technical paper. I know all you want to hear all the econometrics of this, and I need to hear it from Celeste myself. So let me just talk about the results without getting into detail of how we do this. And so we take a bunch of metrics, and here's 5 of them that I thought you'd be interested in. How many hours do students get? Do they get a certificate? Do they get an associate's degree? Do they get a bachelor's degree? And what happens to the money they make? And then we have some others. And so we investigate, these 3 cohorts of students, and then we're able to follow them for about 10 years and say, well, what happened to these students in terms of these? And so here's our results. And the red shows what we've added, and the certificates. If you'll notice that there are such a big increase in the percentage of certificates that we don't put it on the scale because it looks strange, but it's 170% increase in certificates, just a dramatic effect. So you look at this, and what do we find? Well, we find, students get more credits, although, the interesting thing is there's not a really big jump in the number of credits. What there is a big jump in achievement with those credits. So what it tells us is that students are getting directed much more effectively into accomplishment. And so certificates, as I already noted, this massive increase in certificates, a really big increase in associate's degrees, not an increase in bachelor's degrees. And I guess that number is not statistically significant if we want to get into the econometrics of this. But what we do find with a couple of groups of students, students who are above median in their high school achievement, actually what it seems to happen is we sort of divert those students from 4 years, not all of them obviously, but a number of them, from going to a 4-year degree to going to a 2-year degree, and we don't get them transferred on to get a 4-year degree. Now we've added some programs statewide in the meantime, and this may be better with the Tennessee Promise program than it was with Knox Achieves. But that's one of the things. Okay, we see this little issue. How do we address that issue? And then finally, what about earnings? And the answer is these folks make more money. And so the program is successful in terms of getting achievement and impacting people's incomes, exactly what the goal was. And then let me turn to Knox Promise. Now, this is a new program, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. This was funded by, or is funded by, the Haslam Family Foundation. There's a related program with different kind of funding that's called Nashville Grad, operating in Davidson County at I'm sitting here forgetting the name of the school all of a sudden. I apologize. Nashville State. Thank you. I just had to think for a second. Nashville State, and running a remarkable program as well. And so this program is intended. It recognizes that a big part of what Tennessee Promise is about isn't money. It's about helping overcome the non-tuition issues that arise for students. And so Knox Promise and Nashville Grad are programs focused on, there may be a little bit of money involved, but they're heavily focused on other things that helping students achieve. And so here we don't have a long window of time to track, of course, because the Knox Promise program started just in 2019. So we've only had 2 cohorts of students so far. But what we're able to do is see, well, let's look at some intermediate metrics and see how well they work. And so what we thought about was, well, do students enroll? Do students stay in school? Do students get higher grade point averages? Do students achieve more hours that they attempt, and so forth? And so I'm not going to show you all those metrics, but let me show you a couple of them. First of all, this shows you in 2019 that we had 1,426 students in the cohort. In 20, we had over 1,500, even as there was a slight shrinkage in the senior class in Knox County. Now, I think it's important to keep in mind that statewide, there was a 19% decrease in first-time community college students. Knox Promise helped result in actual growth of 5 or 6%. So extraordinary difference in getting students enrolled. And Chrissy, I know, can talk in detail about exactly how they're making these kind of things happen. And then another metric, what about persistence? That is, do students stay in school? Obviously, getting them is a start, but that's the goal, is to get achievement, to get hours. First of all, hours do matter in terms of earnings, but also get certificates and get 2-year degrees and 4-year degrees and so forth. So this shows you by school for several of the schools if you want to compare. Although I'm not doing this to say, well, this one's better than that one. They're actually all pretty close. But overall, I'm going to round here, 80% of the students who started in Knox Promise, and this would have been in fall of 2019, went into the spring of 2020. And then on into, now remember, this is in the midst of COVID, 2/3 of them continued into the fall of 2020. Now let's put this in perspective. Statewide, 54% of students continued from 2019 to 20. In Knox Promise, 2/3. So a big difference in the persistence rate of the students, and again, an impressive one. We also find, and I'm not going to show you a chart on this, but we find that students that are part of Knox Promise do a better job of accomplishing the classes that they start. They get the hours much more effectively than the average student. Now, I'm going to just quickly mention 2 subgroups of the Knox Promise program. First of all, this completion grant program, and this is a program aimed at relatively low income students, people making under $70,000, students who are very interested in the programs. And we ask the same kind of questions. Well, what happens to the persistence of these folks? And remember, again, these are often first generation. They are low income students where if we look nationwide, the achievement levels are not as high in many cases. 95+% of these students made it to the spring, and just shy of 4/5 made it into 2020. A remarkable achievement among this group of students. And I think Tennessee Achieves, which manages this program, deserves a lot of credit. But let's not forget the students. The students committed and did what was expected of them. And so great accomplishment as we see that taking place. Really, really encouraging stuff. And then finally, to think a little bit about coaching. And a big part of the Knox Promise program is about coaching students, keeping them involved, keeping, harassing them. Sorry, Chrissy, but that's, keeping them energized about school. And the students who participate in coaching are much more likely to be persistent. And again, go through each of our metrics. We find it with each of the metrics. If students accept and participate in the coaching, they are much more likely to be persistent. They're much more likely, we think, are going to get degrees. We haven't had enough time yet for that to happen. Much more likely to get the hours set before them and so forth. So great accomplishments, I think, first through Knox Achieves as a precursor to what we're getting out of Tennessee Promise program and all the great work that the students are doing, but also that the mentors and the coaches and advisors are doing, and now into Knox Promise as we've expanded and enriched the connections with students in ways that's helping them achieve. So Chrissy, there's some thoughts on what matters and how well things are working so far.
This is great. Thank you so much, Bill. One question comes to mind, and it's not meant to be a political question, just some commentary, but based on what you know about Knox Achieves and Knox Promise, do you have any commentary for Biden's proposal for free college?
Well, it's funny to me as we think about free college, because if we went back a ways, we'd be asking questions, well, what about high school? Should we have free high school? And that's totally non-controversial. It's not a political issue today. We recognize it. We're in a world where success in life, and I mean from an economic perspective, I'm not thinking of all aspects of life, but from an economic perspective, depends heavily on education. It is clear the data are incontroversial. And so do I think that free two-year school makes sense? Absolutely. Now that, we need to structure it around a program that matters. I think, again, if there's one clear lesson from the analysis we and other people have done on some other programs around the country, this is not just about money. This is about coaching and advising and working with the students and keeping them connected. And so if we're just going to throw money at the problem, I'm less of a supporter than if we build a whole framework around helping students be successful.
Obviously, I agree with you. And I've had several reporters reach out over the past few weeks, and that's what I try to reinforce. Like, if you just have free college, right, you're really missing the magic that we've experienced in Tennessee, and all the needles that have been moved are not because college is free. As I always say, it's the carrot that brings students and families to the programs that we've built, right? I don't think anyone would sign up. No 17-year-old voluntarily asks for help, is what I've found. But if you dangle the carrot of free college, you can bring them to the table. And so I think it's an incredibly important incentive for students, but I don't think that it's the silver bullet without the other structures placed around it.
If I could just add, if we look at students like who are receiving Pell Grants, so they were already getting free two-year school if they wanted without anything from Tennessee Promise, they also are doing better than you otherwise would have expected because of the related programs that are going on. They're doing better through Knox Promise than we otherwise would have expected. And it's about these other programs besides money that makes a difference.
My other question before I jump, so anyone who's listening, if you would like to ask Bill a question, please feel free to provide it in the Q&A or the chat, and I will relay those to him. But my second question, Bill, is related to another project that we are launching with Dr. Carruthers around transfer. So I don't love the bachelor statistic, as you know. And so we're really trying to think through a robust transfer program at Tennessee Achieves. Any thoughts about what we may find with regards to those students who are not going on to pursue a bachelor's degree? The hope, right, was that we bring a new student into the post-secondary pipeline, and that student would then begin at a community college, earn an associate's degree, and then transfer on, those who wished to take that route. And what we're finding is there's a disconnect between students who are identifying themselves as, I would like to transfer, and the percent of those who are actually transferring. So any thoughts there?
Well, one of my thoughts has for some time been that okay, so we have a group of students who might have otherwise gone on and gotten a 4-year degree. That is, they might have chosen to start at MTSU or UTK or ETSU or somewhere, and they probably would have gone on and gotten a degree. But we've offered them this carrot, and the carrot says, go to a 2-year school first, and we'll pay for it. And I'm thinking now about above median achievers and probably above median income students. So they're not talking rich students, but ones who would be paying their own. And suddenly mom and dad said, hey, here's free school, let's do this. And then, remember, these are like 18, 19, 20-year-olds, right? And so here is somebody at 20-year-old says, now, mom, I've got a degree, look what I achieved. And I'll effectively lose my scholarship if I shift now, if I transfer, because I don't have Tennessee Promise anymore. And so we effectively take away their scholarship. We say, now go to a big school that you don't know anything about and try to catch up with and get involved with people. And so there's just a lot of barriers that 20-year-olds are going to perceive here. And I think we need to address it just the same way that you and others have thought about, how do we do Knox Promise? How do we do Tennessee Promise? What are the barriers, and how do we design elements to help students overcome that? And so I expect the kind of things I listed, that's what students are going to say to the extent they can figure it out themselves, what's going on. And then the challenge for the policymakers is, what do we do about that? But it matters. And in no way am I saying every student should get a 4-year degree. That's not my point. My point is the students who should get a 4-year degree should get a 4-year degree. We don't want them to stop. And we want to make sure that their level of education lines up appropriately with the career they see for themselves. And that, I think that's a big part of it. And you were joking earlier and talking about students thinking about what earnings they could get in various kinds of occupations and what the occupation opportunities for them are. And again, I think the appropriate thing here is to help students understand what education level they need, and then have ways to help smooth these barriers. That's I think where we need to go. And I know the work that you and Dr. Carruthers are going to do together will be great in helping understand what these barriers are, and then identify how do we deal with them.
Yeah, I think, we got to build an on-ramp to transfer, which we currently don't have. I don't know any state that actually has that. We have, we spend so much time and attention on that first-time freshman, and we really don't think about the transfer student, which often can be just as vulnerable as the student who's entering UT as a freshman versus as a junior coming from one of the community colleges. So I'm really excited about digging in. So more to come there. Okay, Bill, we got some questions for you from our audience members. Barry asked, can you be more specific in exactly which jobs and professions are in demand in Tennessee? I know you know the answer to this.
Yeah. I get asked all the time by students, well, what should I major in? And let me tell you, the world is changing super fast. No question about it. We do know things like supply chain, which has become the biggest major at UTK. Students are finding jobs easily. Business analytics, students are easily finding jobs. These are, both more, let's call them more technical kind of areas. Engineering, students do great there. I mean, there are a lot of fields where students can find opportunities. I think one thing we need to recognize is the world is changing so fast. Where the career opportunities are going to be are also changing. And so there's some efforts going on using data with companies like Burning Glass that allow us to, basically what they're doing is they're going out and scraping all the job ads, looking at what skills, what education levels and so forth are in those jobs that are being advertised. And then they're forecasting forward in real time how jobs are evolving and what skills are needed. And so again, as we think about the jobs and the opportunities out there, we need to think about what skills do I need to compete for the jobs. It's not just about a degree, it's about the right skills. And certificates, again, in many cases can be the right thing for the right student. And so, while I just gave you a few examples of where there's jobs, recognize it's changing fast. And, frankly, people sitting at universities aren't going to be the first ones to see this. I think these kind of well, first the two-year schools and the interaction between the private sector. I know the Department of Labor and Commissioner McCord and is very interested in working with companies to see where education and training needs to go, and the kind of real-time data analysis, big data analysis I was talking about. Those are the things that we need to keep following because things change so fast.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up, right? Like the jobs of 10 years ago are, as you said in the chart, I mean, the chart clearly shows like the jobs of 10 years ago are on the decline. And, that the one chart with all the crazy lines, I mean, the technology and how quickly the technology is ramping up. I mean, I remember a cell phone, how different it looked only 10 years ago. I mean, those things come into play here.
This chart right here that just
the smartphone blows my mind.
Yeah, and this is just the technology. I'm gonna stop sharing now so we can see people. But those aren't even showing the kind of technologies being used in companies. I was reading just this morning about the new warehousing facility that Kroger company is using. They've set up their first one. They're going to build 20 of them. This first one is in Ohio, and they're just developing all kinds of AI in terms of fulfillment. It's a fulfillment center. I mean, this is moving up really, really fast. It's like somebody wants me to bring the chart back up. I will bring it back up.
Great. Okay. Maggie asks, I'm trying to figure this out exactly what you're asking here, but Maggie's asking, let's see, could there be a correlation between COVID impact, for example, loss of income, to the decline in participation and completion?
Yeah. So let me respond to that, because some of it's about completion, a lot of it is about not going to school. And right. So Celeste and I, this time last year, started a project working with SCORE on how COVID was going to affect higher education and government finance. And we thought we had all this figured out. I mean, we thought, well, we've seen this before, we know how this works. And we were absolutely wrong on everything we expected. What normally has happened in recessions in the past is students, they're not as likely to have a job, or potential students. And so in the economics lingo, the opportunity cost of going to school goes down. And so you get this big jump up in numbers of students into your schools. We got just the reverse, almost 1/5 fewer students. I mean, that's extraordinary. And I think COVID is the reasonable explanation for that. And I'm sure it was about masks. I'm sure it was about, I'm afraid to go to school. Just go through the list of things we've all thought about over the last year. Well, so we're 18-year-olds. And so here's our challenge. How do we take the kid who should have shown up at a 2-year school this past August and get him this August? I think that's a bigger challenge. This seamless entry into 2-year schools or 4-year schools is important, because you create that break in there, and now the initiative and inertia to get into school goes up. And so I haven't heard many people talk about that, but I fear, first of all, I fear for, I'm going to use the example, 3rd and 4th graders who didn't get the education they should have gotten. And how do we help them make up for that? But I also worry about the right out of high school kids. How do we help them make up for the fact that they didn't get into school this past year? I think an enormous challenge for us. And so I certainly agree COVID was a part of the story, but it's just like I've all my economics talks have been focused on COVID over the last year. And I purposely didn't even talk about COVID, because the issues we're talking about are not COVID issues. These are lifetime issues. And hopefully we're through much of that. I hope so. We'll all see how that plays out. But as we think about these issues, how do we just not act like COVID didn't happen, because it impacted people, but how do we make up for the negative impacts that it had on people's potential lifetime earnings?
Yeah, I think about, so for those of you who don't know, we are working with a group of students that we've identified known as the gap year students. So it's 2020 students who did not enroll. We are attempting to get their FAFSAs completed, as well as community service hours in, so they can begin this fall. But to Bill's point, I mean, there's so much research around vulnerable student population and the need to get them in the pipeline directly following high school. And so this will be an interesting lift to see how many students will take us up on our harassment, as Bill said, and actually do the things that we're asking them to do. I'll tell you that I have this very strange gut feeling, and I'm hoping the new CDC guidelines coming out help with this, but there is a general sense of disengagement with the class of 2021. You know, our students are never just incredibly eager students, but this particular cohort feels like I just sort of continue to do this motion of like shrugging my shoulders. They just sort of seem like, if I go, fine, and if I don't go, also fine. And so much of the work we're trying to do since January is try to light that fire in their belly and help them remember why they're going. And so mentors certainly play an incredibly important role there. But Maggie, you're right. Many of them made the decision to stay home and help parents who lost jobs rather than go to school directly following high school. Okay, Bill, I'm gonna read you another one. Ready?
Yep.
With the new and emerging technology with electric vehicles, Bill.
My topic. This has got to be a friend.
A friend of Bill Fox. What is next for those industries that had invested so much in the internal combustion engine? How do we prepare for the change? This is the mayor of Warren County. I do know who this is. Hey, Mayor.
Oh, okay. Mayor, I agree with your point. This is one I've been emphasizing for several years. It's not just that they're going to be electric. And okay, so numbers on this. The CEO of BMW commented a couple of years ago. There's 1,800 parts in an internal combustion engine vehicle, and there's like 18 in an electric car. You know, this is just this little simple motor attached to each wheel. Is all an electric car is, or electric truck. And I have a nephew running an electric truck company in Ohio that's building these. And you know, this is where the world is going to be. I saw this morning the estimates for the EU. They'll have 25 million electric cars being sold later this decade. I mean, this is way more cars than are sold in the US in a year. And so this is, it's going to transform much of the manufacturing. I mean, think about it. What we've traditionally done is to make tailpipes, and you know, there's nobody that understands less about engineering than me, but all those little 1,800 parts, we're not going to need them. And they're made all over Tennessee. About 2%. Now that may not sound like so much, just 2%, but let's translate it into numbers. 50 to 60,000 people in Tennessee are making these car parts, and they're not going to have a job. And this is going to, you know, okay, it's not going to happen overnight, but imagine an industry that's just going to decline from here on for the rest of until it's just gone. But it's broader than that, because think of the gasoline stations that will go away, and the repairmen and women who will go away. And then, you know, I think where it's going to head is to autonomous vehicles. And then what that suggests is, I think they'll be owned in fleets. So the people who insure them, and the people who finance them, and the people who sell them will lose their jobs. That's another 5% of Tennesseans. And now we'll need somebody to work on electric cars. So there'll be, you know, some replacement for that. And then the people who use vehicles every day in their life. And that's, you put all that, what I just said together, a mobility alone, that's 1 out of 5 workers in Tennessee that have the potential for their career and their livelihood to be dramatically altered in the next 2 decades. And again, you know, 2 decades sounds like a long time ago, a long time, until you remember that the 20-year-olds we've been talking about will be 40 at that time. They'll still have a 25 or 30-year career in their life ahead of them. And so 20 years is not, or 25 or 30, however long it takes, is not long relative to the working life of the people we're trying to prepare today. And so a major issue. Fortunately, Tennessee has recognized this. Governor Haslam and now Governor Lee have helped us. We're making electric cars at VW. We're going to make them at GM in Middle Tennessee. We have battery plants coming into Clarksville and down near again, near the GM facility. And so we're making some great progress, and our political leaders, many of them are beginning to recognize this is where we're going. Let's not try to keep this from happening, because we're not going to. Let's just figure out how we can build on it and be advantaged from it. And again, let me congratulate our political leaders for being forward thinking in making this happen. A challenging transition. Transitions of that magnitude are difficult without a doubt in every economy.
Yeah, and it just leads to why these conversations are so important to have with students and their parents, right? Like educating the students and the parents about what's coming down the pipeline.
And if I learn, if I do, sorry to interrupt, but if I
please do.
Technical school today and I learned something about repairing automobiles or trucks or whatever it might be with internal combustion engines, how do I keep learning so that I can play some role with electric and or autonomous vehicles in the future? Again, if anything, this emphasizes the lifetime learning importance. That's true for all of us. I mean, everybody on this call probably has done lifetime learning, even if not going back to school, they've had to do it. And the way I do my job is dramatically different. And a big part of it is just look at this chart. And these things that last 25 or 30 years have dramatically altered how I'm able to do my job, made me more productive, I hope, but also required me to learn some new things.
Great. Okay, final question, Bill. So if you were speaking in front of the General Assembly, which I know you do often, and you were asked the question about what should we do next in higher education in Tennessee, what would you advise? Any thoughts there? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I would like to have a list of things, but one of the things I think we really need to focus on, I had the privilege to speak with a group that's a commission that's looking at preparing our labor force for the future. And I did it last Friday. And one of the things that I quickly pointed out was the need for more TCATs. Expanding them across the state more broadly, linking them with high schools. I think this is a key area where we need to make a difference. A second one would be looking at how, the way I would think about it, there smarter people than me would come up with a different way to achieve this. But the notion, again, of helping students move from a 2-year to a 4-year school. So we have this student who, for whatever reason, doesn't get a Hope Scholarship coming out of high school, goes to a 2-year school and does great. Why in the world wouldn't we give them a second shot at a Hope Scholarship so that they could transfer to ETSU or MTSU or UTK? And let's keep that scholarship going for these students. Okay, they were 17 when they didn't get whatever they needed to get a Hope Scholarship. Now they're 19 or 20, and if they've made that kind of change in their life, we ought to recognize it, support them, and help them transfer. So those are just 2 quick examples of things that would be high on my list.
No, both really great examples. We did, speaking of the TCAT, Jackie, who you know on our team, did a dive into what percentage of students had actively enrolled into a TCAT by county, right? So we have a great TCAT facility at the TCAT Knoxville, and only 2% of high school students had actually enrolled at the TCAT. And when we started digging into that number, what we found is that there were, I'm going to make these numbers up, but there were like 30 students who had actually enrolled, but 118 students on a wait list. Right. And so that wait list becomes like almost a dagger to many of these students. Right. Again, going back to enrolling directly after high school, if you're just sort of indefinitely on a wait list, it becomes incredibly discouraging to students. So I agree about the TCAT. My recommendation, not that you asked, Bill, but my recommendation would be to expand Knox Promise. The Haslam Family Foundation has been so generous in their support, but what we're finding is that coaching and those completion grants really are difference makers for our at-risk students.
If I could just add, that should have been high up on my list. I'm sorry, you hit me cold. And it would have been, because as we showed, while they're just interim measures of achievement, what we're seeing is Knox Promise has really made a difference. I showed you the data on that. And so I think that's a great example. 2 other comments about TCATs, just to note, the persistence level at them is very high.
Yes.
Much higher than at other schools. Keep that in mind. I mean, students go for whatever reason they stay. They must see value because they're staying. And the second one I just would note is much of my thinking on this came from talking to President Boyd. And here's the president of the University of Tennessee recognizing the importance of TCATs and not just saying, well, this is all about UTK or University of Tennessee campuses, but seeing the importance of those kind of that kind of education and those kind of jobs for Tennessee and for the individuals.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Bill. This has been a gift and I appreciate you so much. And I hope everyone has learned so much more than they knew before about the Tennessee Achieves data. I mean, I love looking at Knox Achieves data over time. The longitudinal data process is so important to us as we continue to think creatively and innovatively about how we can best serve students. So if you do have additional questions for us, feel free to reach out. I do know there is some chatter about difficulty reaching your students. Know that has been happening for me for the last 13 years. I've been here the whole time, and every year I answer questions about why are my students not as responsive as I want them to be? I would say hang with them. It's always really important to be the grown-up in the situation. And if you get one student to respond, that's a win. It's changing a student's life. It's not a widget, it's a human being. And I think about my journey all the time and how important it was for me to make the leap as the first person in my family to go to college. And now my 3 children talk about going to college. So one human is sort of cycle breaking kind of work. And so keeping that in mind can get, as you deal with what can be a really frustrating situations for students. But you can always email me. I'm happy to share tips about, how you can specifically text message them to get some responses, copying parents, all sorts of different tips. But Bill, thank you again for your time. I appreciate you so much and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Chrissy, very much. Great to be with you.